Our guest today is the superintendent of the Chicago Police Department. He has served as superintendent over 2 years. Prior to his appointment, our guest today led the Newark, New Jersey Police Department. He began his career in law enforcement with the New York Police Department 25 years ago. In the New York Police Department, our guest today served as principal crime strategist and ultimately deputy commissioner of operations. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Garry McCarthy. Superintendent. All right, have fun up here.
Well, thank you, Jay, and thank you, everybody, for being here. I already heard about the Cubs. I already heard about the White Sox. I think I know how to handle this. Let's go, Hawks. What do we think? As a matter of fact, I think I still want to have a conversation with Rafi Torres, but that's a whole nother story. So what I think I want to do today, and bear with me, I generally don't do PowerPoints, but I thought that this was an important enough presentation that we would put something together, so we'll see how that comes out. But what I'd like to do is take you through what's been happening in the Chicago Police Department basically for the last 2 years. May 16th was the mayor's 2-year anniversary as the mayor of the city, and that's the day that I started. And interestingly enough, he had announced me as the candidate to be ratified by the council on May 1st. And as you may or may not know, Rahm Emanuel is a little bit impatient. And on May 1st, he announced me, and he expected me to be here working on May 16th. I did have a couple of things to close up a couple of 100 miles away and kind of pack things up and get out here, but that's what happened. I'd like to take you a little bit further back and tell you a quick story about the first time that I met Mayor Emanuel. Kind of a bizarre circumstance. I got a phone call and asked me if I was interested in applying for this job. And I agreed, and they said, well, the mayor would like to meet with you sooner rather than later. And I said, okay. This was at about 8 o'clock in the evening, East Coast time, so it's 9 o'clock here in Chicago. And I said, okay, when sooner? And they said, well, how about Monday? Now, this was on a Thursday. And I said, Monday doesn't work for me. I'm supposed to be in California for some training. But I'm available between now and then. And they said, okay, how about 3 o'clock tomorrow? And I said, okay, great. And I went online and I got myself an airline ticket, and I met him at the O'Hare Hilton. And my plane pulled in naturally late, and I ran through the airport like OJ before he was a criminal. And I got ushered into a room where I laid eyes on the mayor for the first time. And he's on his cell phone, and he turns, he goes like this. He looks at me and he goes, first words the man ever spoke to me, dude, you're right out of Central Casting. And then he goes right back to his phone call. And that's how our relationship started. It turns out that day, we sat down for about an hour and 45 minutes, just he and I in a room. And I got to tell you, that's the longest I've ever spoken to him, because they're very short bursts at this point, 10 seconds here, 20 seconds there. If you work for the mayor, you understand exactly what I'm talking about. But the thing that we came away with was the fact that we had a shared vision as to what policing should look like in a city like Chicago, where Chicago was with a historic violence problem that goes back generations. And then he challenged me, okay, so we've got a shared vision. You tell me how to do it. And we kind of pieced together a plan from there moving forward. And we've undertaken a sea change in this department over a 2-year period. Jay's numbers were off a little bit. I did 25 years in the NYPD. Then I did 5 years in Newark, and now I'm going into my 33rd year in police work. And I had the opportunity to be at the right place at the right time on a number of occasions. And I was in upper middle management as a captain in the NYPD when Bill Bratton came to New York and really revolutionized the way that police work is done from being reactive to being proactive. There was a time when academics and most police departments in the country thought that there was nothing that we could do about crime except show up after it happens, take a report, and do an investigation. As a result of the way that Bratton revolutionized the NYPD, he did it in, believe it or not, 26 months. He spent 26 months in New York City. He changed the way the NYPD and policing is done across this country, probably forever. And the fact is, I learned an awful lot from that. And some of the things that I learned, the mayor and I like to speak about the fact that, you know, it's not just about police work. We realize that we play the lead role. We are accountable for reducing crime and providing service to our citizens. And at the end of the day, the mayor calls it his 4 Ps, right? Strategic policing, strong prevention, stiffer penalties for serious crimes, and stable parenting in the home. And this goes to the heart of the matter that while we're accountable for reducing crime, we're not in control of some of the things that cause it, like poverty, education, or the breakup of the family unit, religion, lack of religion, you name it. So in the world of policing, the first thing that I did was I sat down and I looked at what it is that we want to achieve. And I have this idea that the police world has really abandoned community policing. And we abandoned it for the ComStat world, which I ran the ComStat process in New York City for 7 years. We abandoned it for a metrics-driven police department that focuses solely on reducing crime. Now, as a result of that, there's specialization that occurs. And what happens is, in Chicago, it's my belief that we got over-specialized, and we had task forces that were exclusively doing the enforcement. This left the officers in the districts strapped because there weren't enough officers in the districts, because we had these big task forces, and those officers would go from job to job to job. They would never engage the community, and as a result, there really was not a good structure to deliver community policing. So a return to community policing and being able to, as I like to say, walk and chew gum, right? We can engage the community while at the same time reducing crime. And the 2 key principles of this have to do with that community policing concept and greater accountability and authority being pushed down through the department. You don't have to come to me to make a decision. I expect that our bosses are decision makers and they're going to make things happen. These are business management principles of how we run policing today. We're not those top-down organizations that we used to be. At the end of the day, we measure inputs and outputs, and at the same time, our structure here in Chicago, in my estimation, did not provide that we could do these things. The system was not designed to produce the results that we want. And the system that I want is reduce crime and community policing, where we're doing it in partnership with the community and everybody who's out here. It's about systems management. Community policing means, to me, having the same officers on the same beat every single day and them being accountable for what's happening within those beats. As a result, we have to cut back on specialization. We constructed it a little bit different than the way it used to be. And by the way, I'm not saying that we weren't doing it properly because we were getting results. I'm saying I want to do it differently with different goals in mind with those business management principles. By putting those same officers on the same beats every single day, they will connect with the community, they will know the good kids from the bad kids, and we'll stop hearing, "Why are you stopping my son? You know who the criminals are." It also has to do with how we actually handle those interactions. And I'm not going to go too deeply into them, but there's 2 concepts called police legitimacy and procedural justice. And what they both boil down to, and Tracy Mears and Tom Tyler would kill me if I made it this simple, it's less important what you do and more important how you do it. How you interact with kids on the corner when you're stopping them, leaves an impression. Every single time that you have that interaction, you have a teachable moment. And the question becomes, what is it that we're teaching and what is it that we're absolutely learning? So this is a cornerstone of our philosophy, our values in the department, how we treat people. We've developed the largest training program, and we're the largest department in the country that is now pursuing the issues of procedural justice and police legitimacy. Because if we're truly going to have a partnership with the community, there has to be a relationship. For that relationship to exist, it has to be the same cops interacting with the same people every single day and doing it in a fashion where we're not offending people. You can't do that in the structure that we had. Broader accountability. You know, one of the things that we were lacking, in my mind, was geographical accountability. And I want you to understand just how this works. If we want to reduce crime, and if we want to do it in a fashion where the community is not offended, we have to have the same cops in the same beat every single day. I talked about that, and I talked about over-specialization, how if you have a task force on the northwest side one day because something happened there, and the next thing you know on the southeast side something happens, and you put them down there the next day, there's no connection with the community. We're putting hands on the walls. We're offending the community. The fact is, this also applies to our other specialized units. Take, for instance, detectives. Our detectives are in the areas, right? We have districts, and then above the districts, we have areas. The detectives would take, for instance, property crimes or violent crimes consecutively as the jobs came in. So you might have a robbery in one district, and you might have a burglary in another district, and you're the same detective that's handling two different cases in two different areas. By giving our detectives, and Tom Byrne, who's today is his last day as chief of detectives, he did an amazing job of really focusing detectives on geographical accountability. Now they develop an expertise, and they're easily able to recognize patterns, whereas before, if you're working in 2 or 3 different places, you could have jobs all over the place. This also works with gangs and narcotics. If our gang unit was solely focused on where is the hot conflict today, we're chasing our tail. We're going here today, there tomorrow. By assigning geographical accountability and making those guys and women accountable for what's happening there, we're going to get a better product. Take, for instance, the issue of narcotics. A narcotics case, and I'm not being critical of narcotics officers, but in general, any narcotics officer wants to buy up, right? They want to get that street-level dealer, they want to do a case, and they want to buy up. They want to get his boss. Then they want to get his boss. Then they want to get his. They want to go to Colombia and get Pablo Escobar. We already got him. Never mind. We'll get another guy, right? We want to get Chapo Guzman, right? But the fact is, without geographical accountability, that case could start in Englewood, right? And it could end up in Markham. That does nothing to impact on the crime problem in the city. So by assigning that geographical accountability, and you'll see how it flushes out a little bit further in the presentation, everybody is focused on the same thing. The district commander becomes the quarterback because that's the person who's at the center of it all, pulling it all together. That district commander now has the resources at his hands, or she, and we have a lot of women who are district commanders and doing an amazing job for us today, has those resources at their hands. They can tailor the delivery of services that they couldn't tailor before because they didn't have those services in their hands. To support them, we created a position of an executive officer. And many of these things, by the way, people looked at me like with the Scooby-Doo look, like, huh? When I was talking about it. I'll tell you a good one, the case of NATO. Right? You remember that NATO thing? I think that was about 10 years ago, wasn't it? When we were getting ready for NATO, I came back from a conference where I spoke to a couple of folks from different parts of the country, and actually Canada. And we talked about the concept of coming out with the soft look versus coming out with riot gear. And this goes to procedural justice. If you meet confrontation with confrontation, you get confrontation. So the idea, and we used it during NATO, and again, Scooby-Doo, I got a lot of that, was we came out in the crowned hat and the blue shirts until such time as it was starting to ratchet up. And if you look at how we handled it on Cermak, we ratcheted it up from hats to helmets, and then from helmets to riot gear. And you know how that turned out. It turned out very well. It's the same concept with procedural justice and police legitimacy. And this is something that we're able to drive home now, that people are understanding on a different level now. We did not do away with specialization. And by the way, I know it's been reported otherwise, but we broke up two task forces called Mobile Strike Force and TRU, and we distributed a lot of those officers into districts, giving the district commanders accountability. But the area commanders, the area chiefs, have discretionary resources in task forces in the area. Again, geographical accountability. It requires a new way of doing business in the department. Previously, everybody had their own mission, and as a result, they were siloed. We're chasing. Is that for me? We were siloed, and as security, somebody take a look, please. So these are philosophical changes that were affected by the structure of the department. And within that, there's a sea change of internal changes that I'm going to try and run through. Probably the single most important thing that we've been working on is depoliticizing the Chicago Police Department. Now that sounds funny to a lot of people in the room. But the fact is, the mayor has been so supportive in making this happen. And not that we don't want to listen to what people think about who's qualified and so on, but at the end of the day, every personnel decision within the department has been made by me, starting with my first choice of Al Weisinger as the first deputy superintendent. And I'll get into that a little bit. The fact is, if we want merit-based, if we want performance, then we have to concentrate on people who deserve it, not people who may in fact know somebody. And I'm going to give you an example. There was one individual who, through a relationship with an elected official, was promoted to meritorious sergeant, was subsequently promoted to meritorious lieutenant, and then was subsequently promoted to commander and put in charge of one of the toughest districts in the city. And that district exploded. It wasn't fair to the individual, nor was it fair to the community. And we're talking about people getting murdered. We're talking about something that is very, very important here. Meritorious promotions are now meritorious, if you can believe it. Because at the end of the day, we have a process that's headed up by the first deputy, and at the end of the day, I interview every single person who's going to get a meritorious promotion, and I personally make the decisions. And the perception of this is incredibly important. Because if we're going to have external legitimacy, we have to have internal legitimacy. Through that process, over a 2-year period, we've now assigned 21 of our 22 district commanders came through that process. They were selected, hand-selected, through a process by me at the end of the day and put into district command. The role of district commander is the single most important job in the police department. The fact is, those men and women have enormous pressure being put on them to perform. We've given them the authority and the accountability, and we have to have the best and the brightest to do that. We created a career path for executives in a department that's very clearly delineated. And Hector is here. John Graber is here, and these are guys who we took out of special units and put them into district command because I'm a big believer in, I guess it's called cross-pollination. If district command is the single most important job, if you're siloed and just go up through the detective division, if you're siloed and just go up through gangs, if you're siloed and just go up through narcotics, you're not going to share that information and you're not going to understand the importance of what that district commander is doing. So at this point, we've created a career path, and generally, previously, I'm not sure if there was any time frames that you would be in district command, but as I've explained to the alderman, it's generally about 2 years at this point, and we take folks and we put them into slower districts first so they can learn, And then there's a process where the best ones move up into the more difficult districts. You don't want to start in Englewood or Grand Crossing as your first district command. It's very difficult to do. So that process is underway, and the fact is you're seeing the movement inside the department that follows that flow, which is actually going to set us up for better career development for our executives in the future. We also came up with a different way of structuring the department very quickly. You all know that we consolidated 6 districts into 3, and talk about business management principles. This was a no-brainer. We looked at 4 basic metrics for each one of those 6 districts. We looked at geographical size, we looked at calls for service, we looked at crime, and we looked at the number of police officers assigned to each one of those districts. Now, we had 25 districts, and if you ranked them 1 to 25 in all 4 of those metrics, each one of those 6 districts ranked below 18, right? They were really low on the list as far as crime, geography, calls for service, and police officers. Consolidating those districts, we created 3 mid-sized districts as far as crime, geographical size, and calls for service. And do you know where they rank as far as police officers assigned? They rank numbers 1, 2, and 3. It's a no-brainer. We put more cops on the dots by doing this. We freed up administrative staff and consolidated and put them all together. The fact is, this is business management, and it's working. Our detective areas were also consolidated from 5 to 3. Property crime detectives were actually moved into the district, working hand in glove with the officers and the commanders in the districts. Our homicide detectives remain at an area level and working from there. We also moved more than 1,000 officers out from administrative assignments, which is something that we're still doing. Cutting back on it, hiring civilians, and at the same time putting officers on the street. We strengthened the internal affairs unit. We gave them geographical accountability, if you can believe it. We put more investigators there. We brought sergeants in to do investigations. We gave the Internal Affairs Division priority in selecting personnel before OCD, Organized Crime Division, and detectives, because the integrity of the department is probably the most significant thing that we have to pay attention to. We developed new training programs. As I mentioned, police legitimacy. We've created an extra training cycle for our officers in tactics and so on. And we've also got leadership training opportunities. All of this was going on, and this is the non-sexy stuff that you're never going to hear about in the press. But we were not designed to deliver the product that we were trying to deliver when we were set up in the other fashion. While that was happening, we started implementing crime control strategies that we couldn't implement that we wanted to because of the design of the department before that. The first thing we did, and the first 2 things that we did, was we implemented something called ComStat. If you don't know about it, I'm touching it. It's a business management method of measuring crime, putting cops on the dots, coming up with methods to address it, and holding folks accountable all at the same time. There's 4 steps to it. It's timely, accurate intelligence. It's effective tactics. It's quick response. And it's also relentless follow-up and assessment. Very simple process. It is not a meeting. It's a process. And every week, it manifests itself in a meeting where we hold commanders accountable and ask them what's going on. We also, I'm a big believer in the broken windows theory. My dad was a Marine Corps drill instructor, and I learned very early in life that taking care of the little things can prevent the big things from happening. And this is something in New York City, broken windows and ComStat are the 2 cornerstones for why New York has about an 80% reduction in the murder rate over the last 20 years. And people say, well, how can we pay attention to these little things when we're talking about gunshots? When we implemented this in Newark, the best possible scenario that could have happened within 2 weeks of us starting doing quality of life enforcement. Because the guy who stands on the corner consuming alcohol also may carry a gun. And if we pass by the opportunity to do the enforcement for the open alcohol, we're passing up a firearm. This guy is standing on a corner. He's drinking a beer. 2 officers pass by, see him. They stop him. Turns out they search him. He has a gun. They search him further. He's got 2 guns. They take him into the district. They arrest him. They process him. And they find out that he just got out of prison from a 6-year stint because he had shot somebody on that corner 6 years previous. It's the best possible scenario that could have happened in Newark because everybody's looking at me saying, you really want us to stop people from drinking beer on a corner? Well, the answer is yes, because the fact is we prevented a shooting, if not a murder, by stopping that guy because he was drinking alcohol. But one of the things that we have here in Chicago was, again, a faulty system. And you might have heard about this. The council just fixed this for us. The fact is, the way we do quality of life enforcement, which is for criminal conduct, it's low-level criminal conduct, is through something called the administrative notice of violation, which is a civil remedy for a criminal offense. That doesn't make a lot of sense now, does it? And if the goal of quality of life enforcement is to change the behavior, which it is, and we get a secondary benefit when we actually stop criminals, find out that they have guns or warrants, the administrative notice of violation was going 65% unanswered. And it wasn't going unanswered by John Q. Citizen, who just came home from working a long day and happened to be sitting out in front of his house drinking a Heineken. It was going unanswered from the criminal, because John Q. Citizen will pay his ticket and not do it again. But the criminal, the guy who we're trying to get into, would simply take it and throw it over his shoulder, and we could issue ticket after ticket after ticket. Well, the council just ratified something that's changing that, where for 4 categories, public consumption of alcohol, public urination, cannabis, and gambling, right? Dice games on the south side, they lead to shootings. If you don't answer that ticket, the next time we encounter you, you'll have a warrant and will be taken into custody. This is how we're going to start making these systems actually work. Those were general crime reduction strategies. Now I want to talk specifically about what it is that we're doing here in Chicago. The fact is, Chicago has one of the worst gang violence problems in the country, okay? And while there were things that we did about gangs, we did not have a comprehensive gang violence reduction strategy. So we took a look across the country, and we looked at some of the best practices, and we kind of created some of our own, and we came up with a comprehensive gang violence reduction strategy. And there's a number of key components that I'm just going to touch on. But the first one is the most important one. Remember I said the first component to ComStat is timely, accurate intelligence? Well, we have a problem in Chicago with retaliatory shootings between gangs. One gang member will get shot here. As a result, they will shoot somebody here. We get between 4 and 6 shootings back to back, 4 to 6 hours apart, and we can't get in front of it. So what we did was, we did an audit of all the gangs in the city. We sat around maps on a district-by-district basis. We charted out the turfs that they call their own, because I'm not willing to say they own a turf. We identified the turfs. We identified the members of each gang. We identified each gang, and we identified who they're in conflict with. Because now when a member of Gang A gets shot here, and we put this right into our beat officers' hands, by the way, when gang member A gets shot here, we can predict that they're going to shoot gang member B here because we already know who they're in conflict with. There's a saying in baseball, you have to know what you're doing with the ball before it gets hit to you. And this is the same exact concept. That information is right in the officer's hands there. And by the way, remember I talked about the primacy of patrol and the beat officers. They're supported by the tactical officers in the district, the gang enforcement folks, gang intel, and narcotics. Not the other way around. Another thing that we did, and this came out of focus groups with officers. If you realize that our strategy is to get to the places where the retail can occur, one of the things that we found out by talking to our officers, and Mike, this was your guys came up with this in a focus group in my office, they said, we issue I-bonds, which means that these guys are out the door while I'm still doing paperwork. So think about the logic, right? We want to deploy our cops here because we just had a shooting here, and we anticipate there's going to be retaliation. So we come across a gang member who's, I don't know, smoking weed. So we arrest him for that low-level offense. He goes into the district, he signs a piece of paper and says, yes, I'll go to court, I'll see Justice Burke on whatever date it is, and he walks out the door while the officer is finishing the paperwork. Isn't that a little bit counterintuitive? We're trying to put the cop out there to prevent it, we're putting a gang member out there before the cop. So I said to my legal guys, my legal counsel, Ralph Price, I think Ralph is here, I said, Ralph, is that policy? And he says, yes. I said, well, who makes policy? He says, you do. I said, okay. So we're not going to give I-bonds to gang members. How about that? And there was a big uproar about it, and guess what? It's working. The other thing that we're doing that's different, I'm just going to touch on it, is something that we call the violence reduction strategy. We have call-ins with gang members, and this actually started under Jody Weiss, and it was completely misunderstood and completely misrepresented. This is not a negotiation with gang members. I want to be clear. What happens is we bring in parolees who are on, gang members who are on parole. We bring them in, we sit them down, and they get delivered to them 3 messages. The first one is from law enforcement. It's, if you don't stop shooting, we're going to take every single component of law enforcement and bring it down on your head and take out your particular group first. You go right to the top of the pile. The state's attorney is there, the U.S. attorney is there, DEA, FBI, ATF, you name it, everybody who's doing enforcement in the city of Chicago. The second message that they receive is a plea from the community to say, please look at what you're doing. We have the parents of murdered children come in and speak to them and explain to them what they're doing to the families and the community. And then the third thing that they receive is an offer of social services, help to get a job, help to get a GED, whatever it is, because that's always going to be the excuse. Well, I'm only doing what I'm doing because I can't get a JOB. So that's what that program is. We've seen really good results, particularly on the northwest side. In the 25th district, so far, it's working very, very well. We came up with a new way to fight narcotics. I'm giving you a lot, and I apologize. It's been my contention that the war on drugs in the United States has been a wholesale failure because law enforcement will never fix the narcotics problem in this country. And what have we done to date? We do cases, we lock up narcotics dealers, we put kilos on a table, we put up an organizational chart, we declare victory, we walk away, and there's somebody selling narcotics on that corner before we can even finish the press conference. So we came up with a different way of doing it. What we're doing is a holistic approach. To me, this is true community policing. First thing we do is we lock up the drug dealers, right? We're law enforcement, that's our job. The second thing we do is we don't give that territory back. I told you my dad was a drill instructor. He was a World War II Marine. He didn't like taking the same ground twice. That's just stupid. So what we do is we put police officers at these spots as we take back corner by corner, eliminating market by market. Because as long as demand exists at that location, supply will show back up. So when that officer's encountering people who are coming there to buy narcotics and they find out they can't buy it, they will go somewhere else. I know, we're displacing demand, but we're also displacing the market and the crime that goes along with it. We fix broken windows. We bring in city services. We take this holistic approach. We use elected officials. The mayor is 1,000% behind us. Streets and Sands, any city agency that you can think of, to clean out lots, paint over graffiti, fix potholes, fix street lights, all those nice things that inspire civic pride. And then we organize the community and slowly but surely back out. It works. In the places where we've done this, we've seen incredible results as this process has moved forward. And the fact is, it's a new way of attacking the narcotics problem. Because what's our job as a small municipal police department? It's to reduce crime and increase quality of life for the residents of the city. And by eliminating that market on a corner, we can actually do that. We created an initiative in the in the 11th District on the west side. In a very general sense, the crime problem in Chicago goes something like this. Well, it's primarily wrapped around gangs on the northwest side and the south side. On the west side, narcotics is the prime motivator for a lot of the violence. Although they might be gang members, it's about narcotics. Well, this is a no-brainer. We put together an initiative about a year ago focusing on the 7th District, which is Englewood, and the 11th District, which is Lawndale. Because between those two districts, they accounted for 20 to 25% of the violence in this city for the last 20 years. It's a no-brainer to do a pile-on those two locations. What was working in Englewood was not working on the west side. And it turns out we were using the wrong medicine for what ails us. About 6 months ago, no, less than that, about 3 months ago, we freed up officers and we put together a narcotics initiative in the 11th District that's a uniform and an undercover component. What we do is anytime there's a shooting, anytime there's violence, we go in, undercover officers make narcotics buys, then we saturate that area as soon as we arrest all those people with the uniforms. Because at the end of the day, if they're businessmen, they will figure out that the violence is bad for their business. And every time we do that, we shut down their market. They don't make any money. This is something that we did in Washington Heights in New York City. We trained them that it's bad for business. They stopped doing it. There's about an 80% reduction in the violence rate in West Lawndale since we started this initiative. In Englewood last year, you might have heard, Englewood led the city in murder reduction last year. You know, I like to tell a story that my dad was also a police officer in New York City. He went on right after World War II in 1947. And when I went on in 1981, he says to me, Gary, police work is easy. He says, what I want you to do is your first day on patrol. He says, you walk down your post, you pick out the biggest guy on the block, and you beat the crap out of him in front of all his friends. Nobody will mess with you after that. I said, Dad, I'm going to try something different. But at the end of the day, I'm using my dad's philosophy here. Because we're going to turn around Englewood, which we all know is the epitome of decay and crime in this city for a long, long time. And it's not okay. This is something that I love about working for the mayor. It's not okay if a kid gets murdered in Englewood just because it didn't happen on Michigan Avenue. It's not okay because it didn't happen uptown. The fact is, what we did was we took and we gave appropriate resources to the places that need them. Remember when we didn't have geographical integrity? People would just run around chasing, as my friend in narcotics used to say, the kilo fairy if you were in narcotics, in the gang unit, chasing Pablo Escobar, right? In the gang unit, chasing where the violence is. No. Everybody stays home and plays their position, and we're going to give you enough resources to address it. Well, that's what we did in Englewood. The second thing that we did, and I want to reiterate something that I mentioned earlier, was a change in leadership. My God, does leadership matter? Because you put the right people in the right places with the right resources and you hold them accountable, and you could sit back and watch it happen. We took Leo Schmitz, who is one of the most talented, dedicated, hardest working, lives police work, lives, eats, breathes it, and we put him into Englewood, and man, did he turn that place around. Process, progress, not victory. Well, as a result of that, we also took and we promoted Leo in what I believe is an unprecedented move in the Chicago Police Department to deputy chief. And we left him in Englewood. He's not leaving until he fulfills at least a 2-year commitment in Englewood, just to symbolize how important that position is to the department. Because if we can turn Englewood around, we can turn around any single part of this city. The last thing, oh no, not the last thing, I'm sorry. Another thing is something called, you guys got a little time, right? Operation Impact. A couple of years ago in New York, Ray Kelly said to me, Gary, I want to do something different with the graduating class of recruits from the academy. So I came up with this program, and it's real simple. It's putting cops on the dots. It's hotspot policing. It's looking, we did a 3-year analysis of shootings, murders, and robberies. and we looked, and we found 3% of our geography that is accountable for about 20% of those crimes. I want you to think about that for a second. Talk about a disproportionate amount of crime, and particularly violent crime, in these neighborhoods. And what you do is you saturate them during the time frames that the crime is most likely to happen. Again, timely, accurate intelligence. But this is a 3-year analysis. The fact is, it works. I didn't even know this, but when we started to implement it here, people did research and they said, you know, this is DOJ, Department of Justice, has called this a tried and true method and a best practice in reducing crime. It's something that we're doing now. It's working incredibly well for us. We started it with overtime. We've now started folding our graduating rookie classes into those zones and cutting back on the overtime on foot patrol. And the community response to having beat officers walking on the streets in these tough neighborhoods is overwhelming, and these young men and women are out there just kicking butt. The last thing that I'm going to talk about, finally, is not just hotspot policing, but hot people policing. There's a fellow named Andrew Papachristos, who's a professor at Yale now. He's actually from Chicago. He was at UIC, I believe, for a while, who came up with a social networking analysis that goes something like this. If you take the murder rate in the city of Chicago, and the way we measure it nationally is we compare it per 100,000 people. In Chicago, it's about 14.5 per 100,000. And that's how we compare Chicago to New York and New York to New Orleans and so on across the country. If you look at the murder rate in West Lawndale, in the 11th District, it's about 44.5 per 100,000. It's basically 3 times the murder rate of the rest of the city. So if you do this, I think it's called a regression analysis. Maybe there's a sociologist here who could tell me. And you take a homicide victim who's a gangbanger, and you look at his associates, and you look at his associates, okay? 2 degrees of separation from the actual victim. And you take that network of people out of West Lawndale, the murder rate drops to 14.5 per 100,000. But do you know what the murder rate is in that network? It's 1,685 per 100,000. So what are we saying here? In the Bugs Bunny cartoons, it was round up the usual suspects, right? Clancy, take the boys and surround the house. The fact is, intuitively, we know, as police, it's the same people, it's a small cadre of people that are responsible for the vast amount of crime anywhere, whether it's in Chicago, Cleveland, New York, Detroit, any city in this country. The fact is, we've got a method to now identify who they are. And we're going after them because these guys don't have W-2s, right? These guys are criminals. They're hardcore criminals. Now, this is going to sound a little bit scary. In that actual analysis, we've identified 17,000 people, right? Well, first of all, I think we could take them because I've got 12,500 and I think we're tougher. But the second thing is we can prioritize them. And we've identified 470 or so who have the highest likelihood to be involved in a murder as a victim or an offender. Because you're the offender today, you're the victim tomorrow, and so on. That's the way that network works. And we're going after them. We call it hot people policing. The fact is, all of these things are coming together for us at one time. We have a plan. We've strengthened ourselves internally. And the results across the city are what's astounding. It's all coming together at the same time. And what are the results? The results are the fact that shootings are down nearly 30% this year. The fact is that overall crime is down 12% this year. And if you look at the 2-year period, it's down 21% overall crime. The fact is murders are down nearly 40% this year while we stand here. And what I'd like to point out, we measure ourselves in statistics, but these are people. There's 283 fewer shooting victims. There's more than 3,200 fewer overall crime victims, and 74 less people murdered this year than they were last year. Now, we had a bad year last year for murder. Not that there's a good year for murder, right? But last year, we had an increase in murders. The best year the city has had since going back to, I think, 1964 or 1965 was 2011, when we had 435. We're below the 2011 number right now. So we're making progress on this. And what doesn't get reported, because this got lost at the end of 2012, is the fact that we had some progress in the fourth quarter of 2012. So let's see if I can get these charts right. So this is a chart that shows you the fourth quarter of 2012, where you had 2011 is on the right, that green bar. The first quarter in 2013, again, a decrease. From October 1st through today, there were 90 less murder victims in this city than there were at the same time. But this is progress that's happening on the south and the west sides, right? Because that's where our shootings and our murders happen. What's fascinating to me is the fact that the district in Chicago that is going through the largest crime reduction right now is one of the lowest crime neighborhoods. Edgewater, on the northeast side, has more than a 30% reduction in the murder rate this year. And if you, not the murder rate, I'm sorry, in the overall crime rate. The fact is, as those numbers get smaller, they're harder to reduce. And one of the lowest crime neighborhoods in the city has the largest percentage reduction. This is something that's happening across the city. Many challenges remain for us. You've all heard me talk about guns. I'm going to say one thing about it. There's too many guns coming in. There's not enough punishment on the back end. The fact is, without the requirement to report the loss, theft, or transfer in the state of Illinois of a gun, you buy a gun, you don't have to tell anybody if it's lost, stolen, or if you sell it. Without a requirement for universal background checks, without an assault weapons ban, an extended magazines ban, we're up against it, folks. We're drinking from a fire hose. We seize more guns than any city in the country every single year. This goes back, I don't even know how long, 20, 30 years. The fact is, every one of those guns that we take is an armed confrontation by our men and women, putting themselves in harm's way. The fact is, in the first half of 2012, we took 3 guns off the street for every one that the Los Angeles Police Department took off the street. And we took 9 guns for every one that the NYPD took off the street. Just please think about that for a second. 9 to 1. I worked there. There's really good cops there, just like the cops that we've got here. We're not better at getting them. There's just that many more. And what happens? What happens? Did you know that in the state of Illinois, and I just learned this from a conversation with a judge, in the state of Illinois, possession of a loaded firearm is the same class felony as possession of untaxed cigarettes. Where is our priority? And get this one. I didn't even know it existed. Possession of a theft shielding device. Does anybody know what that is? No, there's no pickpockets here. The fact is, you get that aluminum lined bag that you go into Macy's and you steal property so it doesn't beep when you go out. The possession of that bag is the same class felony as a loaded firearm. Are you kidding me? Where's the priority? So when we talk about gun laws, and I have these conversations with judges all the time, it's not about limiting their discretion. It's about practicality. Because right now as I stand here, I could tell you that without a mandatory minimum for illegal possession of a firearm, like they have in New York State of 3.5 years, I can tell you there's 72 individuals who we've identified who have either been murdered or have been a shooter or have been shot that would not have been available to commit that crime if that mandatory minimum existed, including the murder of Hydea Pendleton. Everybody heard about the case a couple of weeks ago with a young man who was going to the Green Line and got shot and killed. Did you know that we solved that crime? Probably not. That doesn't get reported very much. But the individual was sentenced to 8 years in IDOC in 2012. And he was on the street in 2013 to commit a murder. What the heck is going on? Folks, we could do some great policing. And I'm telling you, the men and women of this department, the police officers on the street, the commanders, get all the credit for all of that progress that we're making. We're making progress. There's no two ways about it. But without sensible gun laws in this state that we talk about every week, we can't fix it. It's a failed system. So what does success look like for the Chicago Police Department? In my mind, it's about creating sustainability. It's about institutionalizing these changes, and it's about continuing to find ways to reduce crime. That's what we've been doing for 2 years in this strange and wonderful place of 16-inch softballs and no gloves. By the way, we started a softball league. I can't wait to see all the cops with splints on their fingers now. We're going to see how that works out. But I absolutely love what we do. I couldn't be more proud of the men and women of this department because they are just doing an exceptional job and making a difference every single day. And I guess now I have to take questions.
Mark Watermiller. Well, dinner will be at 5. Okay, here we go. Are you hiring more cops, and are you increasing stop and frisk?
One of the things that I find amusing is that people think that we don't stop and frisk people in the city of Chicago. Where do you think we get all of those guns from? They don't come up to us and say, I've got a gun. Our cops are actively engaged every single day. The point is, how is it that we do it? We do it based on crime patterns, crime trends, observation, and articulation of those officers. The fact is, we do it. The second thing is, are we hiring more officers? Absolutely. We just graduated the first class of 105, which I think is one of the largest classes since I don't even know when. We're not increasing the size of the department. We've reached a level of about 12.5, and that's where we're staying. So the answer is yes, we're hiring to fill attrition. That's an ongoing process. We've got, I don't even know how many hires at this point, 400 to 500 or 600 over the last 6, 8, 10 months, including those that are in the academy right now.
We have several questions from news people. You could ask after this is over.
No, they can't.
As I say, you can't ask it after it's over. I'm sorry, that's just a new policy. We just did the metrics. All right. I've been 4 years at the academy. I know what I'm up against here. Here we go. I hear that, this is Peter Scozzi, I hear that Chicago gangs have smaller territories, which lead to more turf wars and violence. How big a variable is this in Chicago's homicide rate?
It's a great question. It's a very big one. One of the dynamics that people tried to talk about, and I kind of disregarded, was when they said, you know, years ago when we had more structured gangs, this didn't happen. And I had to point out to people that we had twice as many homicides in the 90s. We're at a rate that's half of what it was in the 90s, and it's still unacceptable. By the way, I didn't say that during this speech. We have an unacceptable level of gun violence in this city. And what we're talking about here is progress. It's not success. It's progress. We expect this to build on itself. The fact is, the gangs are splintering off. They are getting smaller, and as a result, that's a dynamic that last year exploded on us. We weren't getting in front of the gang violence retaliatory shootings, and there were more gangs that were involved in it. So that is an absolute dynamic, but I got to tell you something. Law enforcement is not going to fix the gang problem in the city, just like we're not going to fix the narcotics problem. What we can do is try and change the culture, try and change their behaviors. But the gang issue is a social issue, as is narcotics. So sometimes, again, remember how I said you got to apply the right medicine to what ails you? In the 11th district, it's about narcotics, and when we put the narcotics initiative in there, we got the results. We're teaching them to stop shooting. They're learning. Some people, it takes longer than others. But the fact is, this is a very important dynamic in what's happening here.
Okay. 2 more questions, and I apologize for those of you who have special interests and want to perhaps stick it to the superintendent, but
Maybe
do that, perhaps. Craig Howard, MacArthur Foundation. Where are you, Craig? Craig.
Right here. It's right there.
All right, good. I hate to see a guy ask a question then cut out. It's a bad sign. My understanding is, watch this. My understanding that the city has paid out close to $500 million over the past decade or more in claims to settle police misconduct accusations. What is the department doing to address this problem? Clearly, the MacArthur Foundation could help.
Craig, great question. Great question and absolutely accurate. You know, and since I've been here, we've been getting hammered with case after case that goes back to Burge cases from the 90s. You know, what's not, we're ensuring that our officers behave in a proper fashion. You take the Abadi case, and again, I'm going to talk about system design and systems failure. Take the Abadi case, where the officer beat up that bartender, right? There's another case that we just had to pay out. That case happened in 2007, right? And I'm not shrugging it off on somebody else. What I'm saying is these are all issues that happened in the past that are coming to fruition now. They call the police. 2 policemen come to the scene of that incident. They're told what happened. I believe they're given the information that his first name is Anthony, that he is a police officer, and that they actually have a video of the incident. And those 2 officers took an assault report and then left. They didn't notify a supervisor that they had an alleged misconduct of an officer. They didn't notify a supervisor because they went into a licensed premise. They didn't get the video. They didn't put down on the report that he was a police officer. So it took the department a couple of days to catch up to it. Those officers were investigated, and they were pretty severely disciplined by the department. They were given a 60-day suspension. Losing 2 months' pay is pretty significant to any one of us. Through the arbitration process, that penalty was knocked down to 30 days. That was the sum and substance of a quote-unquote code of silence for that particular case. From that point forward, that case was handled, and it was mishandled, it was fumbled. But the fact is, the code of silence issue, the entirety of that code of silence was those 2 first officers who thought they were doing the right thing. They were severely disciplined, and it was knocked down because of the way the process works. I think this is a failed system. One of the things that we discuss with the FOP all the time is the disciplinary system. Now, it's their job to protect their guys, and it's my job to maintain order in the department. I'm one of the few CEOs in the country of a police department who does not have control of the disciplinary process in the department. And just to make it clear, in case you don't know this, IPRA, right, the Independent Police Review Authority, civilian group of people who, if there's a force allegation or a special category verbal abuse, in other words, race, color, creed, sexual orientation, they take and investigate the case, right? They now make their determination and come to me and say, look, this is what we think. Do you agree or disagree? This is a penalty, he's guilty. I can agree with them, sign off on it, and it's done. If I disagree, then we have to try and negotiate. If we can't negotiate, then it goes to the police board, another civilian board that now will have a trial and rule on that disciplinary case. I'm not in control of the disciplinary process, but I'm expected to maintain the order of the department. Another failed system. So the fact is, through the training, through supervision, and through discipline, we're trying to maintain the officer's conduct to the best standards that we can. Procedural justice, police legitimacy. And the fact is, until we change some of these other systems, we're going to have a struggle on our hands.
Last question, and it'll be a short one. Michael Rodriguez. Where are you, Mike?
Right next to Craig.
Seems to be a very
We
hot.
only got questions.
I would say a very hot table there. And is this? What's the name of the organization? Okay. What? Come on. Tough here. This is a good question. What % of crime reduction would you attribute to 1, police, 2, community strategies, 3, policy change, or 4, societal factors? Good question to end with.
Well, we all know the weather is the sole determining factor of what happens with crime. Every time I get asked that question, I say the same thing. And people say, So you don't think the weather has anything to do with crime? And I say, no. I said crime is a factor. It's not a cause, nor does it prevent crime from occurring. I mean, weather is a factor. So, you know, there's a whole lot of things that are happening all at the same time. One of the things that I forgot to mention in my speech is the fact that Dennis Rosenbaum from the UIC is doing citizen satisfaction surveys. And you'll never see this. There was one article, I think, done on it a while back. We're at an 80% approval rating by an independent authority who's surveying people who had encounters with the police. That has an impact on what's happening. Our homicide clearance rate doubled from last year to this year, in that last year we only solved about 30%, and this year we're solving about 65%, which has to do with that code of silence, no snitching in the community. So I believe that that cooperation between the police and the community is having a huge impact on crime reduction. People are fed up in this city. There's a mood that you can feel, especially in the neighborhoods on the south and the west side, where people are just fed up and intolerant of it. I go to community meetings probably 3 times a week, 4 times a week, and the fact is we have the same discussion all the time. People tell us we know that it's not just a police problem, that there's so much more to crime reduction and everybody has to step up and everybody has to be a part of it. The clergy, the schools, the community. I'm not avoiding your question, but I can't put numbers on that. What I can tell you is that there's no doubt that efficient policing has an impact on what happens. We critique when we have a flare-up in a district and how we get in front of it and what it is that we didn't do and how to fix it so we don't have that problem again. Clearly, the enforcement that we do makes a big difference on what's happening here. But, you know, the vision that I have is the fact that we can do all of that and still not solve the problem if we're not getting that cooperation from the community, which is why at the baseline of what we're talking about community policing and excellent metrics-driven policing all at the same time. We can walk and chew gum. I can't put percentages on that, but every single one of those issues has a lot to do with crime reduction and crime increase, societal conditions, people not having jobs. That leads, a lot of people talk about the economy and crime, and I believe you don't lose your job and start sticking up gas stations, but you will report your car stolen and make an insurance claim. You can't make your payments on your car, so you report it stolen. You will report theft, which, by the way, anybody hear about the incident on the Magnificent Mile where a woman lost like $2 million worth of jewelry in an afternoon robbery? Did anybody find that suspicious when you first heard that story? Hold on, show of hands, please, help me here.
Look around you.
Okay, how about you guys with the cameras? Did you think so? Yeah, a couple of them actually did. Not the guys who report it. Anyway, all of those things have an impact on what's happening. No two ways about it. I can't put numbers on it.
How about a big round of applause? Holy shit,